Oh, hello there, and welcome back to the podcast where today I'm delighted to be joined by Graham Burnett, permaculture expert and old comrade of mine in the anarcho-punk years, I guess. So yeah, hello Graham, and thank you very much
Hi
for coming.
Gerald, thanks for the invite and for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's been the first time I've spoken to you for ages, but we go back
Yeah.
a long time, don't we? So where I always start these things really is asking a little bit about your upbringing with particular kind of focus on how you think it kind of turned you into the person you are now, basically. So yeah,
Yeah, I guess I'm probably about the same age as you. I was born in 1960. I hope I haven't insulted you there, but
I've got 3 years on you actually,
3 years.
but
Okay.
I'm not insulted.
Okay. um, yeah, so I was born in 1960. Had fairly I suppose it all really started to happen in the 1970s, really. And yeah, the classic thing when I was a kid at school, got into, Yes and Genesis and Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. And then, of course, 1977, and it's all punk rock, which I guess people at our age, um, that's a fairly standard story, I guess. I think, yeah,
You were in
thing about
Southend, yeah?
I lived most of my life from the age of 6 or 7 years old. I lived in Southend on Zine. Before that, I lived in Wickford, which was just along the down the road from here. And then when my mum and dad split up, when I was probably, like I say, about 6 or 7 years old, we moved to Southend, and that's where I've been ever since. So I feel quite centred in the town where I live. It's my upbringing. I think I've always lived within about a square mile of where I am now and where I grew
Really?
up as a
Oh,
child.
well,
So yeah,
wow.
not far from that. So maybe we can talk a bit more a recent project about that. I can talk about a little bit further into the thing.
Yes.
But yes, I guess that's where I came from, and my
In
roots.
Southend, there was a whole sort of music thing going on, wasn't there, with the Cursor Flyers and people like that?
Yeah.
Were you aware of that when it was happening?
Oh, of course, couldn't help but be aware of it. It was kind of there in the background. Um, in fact, that does lead a little bit into the project that I was going to maybe leave for later, but maybe talk about it now a little bit.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, go
If I've been doing a project called Southend On Zine for the last couple of years, which is a book just published, and it's kind of about the alternative and radical history of Southend as told through kind of fanzine culture, which you and I both kind of came from, but of course it predates us. Um, in the pre-punk era, kind of counterculture vibe around the early 1970s. There were people running like food cooperatives and street theatre projects and all those kind of things that were going on in the pre-punk era. And they would do a community magazine. There was one called Mushroom and one called Precinct Press, and there were some others. And of course, there was our era, punk era. And then, of course, it carried on after that, So right up to the present day. And as you know, zines are kind of currently a bit of a thing again at the moment. There's quite a cultural resurgence around that. So that seemed like a good framework to kind of tell the story of Southend from a different perspective. Um, if you live in Southend, or if you talk to someone, that's not from Southend and mention it from Southend on Sea, you'll get some kind of condescending sneer about Essex girls or Towie or white man or something like that.
right.
And I just want to show that okay, there's some truth to that narrative, that stereotype, but there's also this whole other counterculture that's kind of going on. And so yeah, for the last 4 years, that's a project I've been working on, and that's just been published. I may have a copy to hand actually, and
Yeah.
up to the screen. Try not to knock everything down at the same time, but this is the book.
Cool.
50 years of kind of alternative publications from from Southend. Oh, I've just had a reminder just come up on my screen that we had this meeting. I'll try and dismiss that. Okay.
You got Stinky Turner on the front.
It's the kind of drawing by of Stinky Turner. I think they actually see that. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah, that's yeah. There he is. Yeah.
That's actually from a local produced fanzine called Hard as Nails. But you may remember that one.
No,
it was put together by a couple of guys from Southend. One of them was in the Cynics, who you probably do remember.
I remember them. Yeah, yeah.
And Paul Barrett, aka Alien, was also the singer of the band Cynics, but as well as that, he was kind of quite into skinhead culture. And it was around the time that skinhead culture was becoming very associated with kind of right-wing ideas. And, you know, the British movement, the National Front and all that had kind of hijacked, if you like, skinheads. And what Ian and Paul were doing were trying to bring it back to its kind of roots as kind of a working class, you know, all that being into reggae and ska and all that, and dressing, you know, dressing sharp and all that kind of stuff. So that was very much their motivation. And Paul is one of the people I've interviewed in the book, and lots of others you might remember. Steve Pegram of Kronstadt Uprising, you may remember them. Yeah. And again, a local band. They did a fanzine called what was it called? Necrology. That was his one, which was kind of, you know, I guess in hindsight, fairly standard anarcho-punk stuff that we were putting out then. But it's all kind of this story or this kind of narrative of Southend that's not often told.
So you've interviewed people. It's not just a compilation of the old fanzines or anything.
No, there's kind of quite extensive, in-depth interviews. It's quite interesting because when I started the project out, I was able to do like face-to-face interviews with people in cafes and stuff like that, and we'd have kind of quite long, in-depth chats that go off on all these tangents. And of course, when COVID came along, it tended to be more by email, and you didn't kind of get quite the same level of interaction, I think. But I think it's still, you know, it's still kind of fairly in-depth, I think. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with that project.
So what kind of eras does it cover? What kind of years does it cover then?
Quite conveniently, it goes from 1971 to 2021, so exactly 50 years, which is the earliest publication I could find was 1971. And I think that coincides with the technologies starting to become more accessible, you know, things like basic photocopiers and Gestetner. You remember Gestetner duplicators?
Oh, I do.
Turn the handle and
I remember having some glorious accidents with them. Yeah.
Your own. You did. Was it Ability Stinks? Was your one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
And that was duplicated, wasn't it? With Gestetner?
Yeah, that was a Gestetner. We did it at Interaction in Kentish Town, which was a sort of community type place that also did gigs. You might have gone to gigs there for a little while, and it was really nice place. And I think I read somewhere on Facebook that it was something to do with International Times. So so there's a bit of kind of nice lineage and kind of continuity going on there.
Yeah. And again, that was something that was very much in my book. You know, the people from the early 1970s, you know, more the counterculture, they were involved with kind of food co-ops up in, you know, there'd be big squatted food co-ops up in London, and they'd go up there in a van and load up the van with like beans and rice and vegetables or whatever, and distribute it around, you know, people in Southend who are part of this food co-op. And so it was all that era, I think, you know.
Yeah.
There is this kind of thing that, you know, it all started with punk, but I think there was, you know, a lot of stuff that was going on way before, you know, the counterculture people who ran things like Interaction, but, you know, not hippies is the right word, but it was that kind of more the radical end of the hippie movement, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, it's the word hippies. I've been interviewing various people, and this word crops up quite a lot, really. And it's not really enough, is it? You know, it doesn't kind of. There should be more words. There should be words for radical hippies, words for stoners, words for, you know, general layabouts and so on and so forth. Yeah, all good things to be, but not the same as each other. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
hippie does have this kind of connotation of people wearing a caftan going, hey man, and
yeah, near off
whereas actually there was
London.
this kind of quite radical leftist anarchist thing that was going on.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking of interaction that the day they got a photocopier and everything moved from Gestetner to photocopier, it was just one of the best days of my life, really. And this photocopier was about the size of a car or a truck, even. It was absolutely enormous, and it collated all the pages for you. And oh, it was magnificent. And we actually changed the name of the fanzine from Ability Stinks to Stability Inc.
That's right, I
Um,
remember that.
when
Yeah.
that happened. Yeah, well, yeah, Ability Stinks felt a bit dated after a while. So. We should go on to your fanzine actually as well, shouldn't we? New Crimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
tell us about
obviously,
that, how that got started and
well,
etc.
that we went a bit around the houses there. But you were asking about, that Southend music scene,
Oh
Cousin
yeah, yes,
Flyers and all that kind of stuff, which
yeah,
we were very much aware of. I think it's quite ironic because Dr. Feelgood, who very well known around here, the closest thing we've got to the Beatles, and Wilco Johnson. You still see kind of Wilco Johnson around and
yeah,
in pubs and things like that. But back in the day, because as you probably know, Dr. Feelgood kind of formed and were motivated by trying to bring music back to basics. I think in the early 1970s, it was all kind of prog rock and kind of, you'd watch the old Grey Whistle Test and we'd like these overproduced bands from California or something, playing this really kind of tedious music. And Dr. Feelgood, as you know, kind of formed as a kind of reaction to that, bringing things back to basics. And there was a whole kind of pub rock boom was really big around Southend. But for us who actually lived there, and then we've made that slightly little bit younger, you go down the pub and all the pubs just seem to be bands doing, like second-rate imitators of Dr. Feelgood and all that kind of stuff, doing Get Your Kicks on Route 66 and Johnny Be Good. And we just found that so boring. And
yeah,
so partly New Crimes was like kind of a reaction against that in turn, trying to covering the younger kind of punk bands who are our peers locally, people like we already mentioned the Cynics and Kronstadt Uprising, and there were all these other bands, I think there was the School Bullies was another one, the Machines, and we wanted to cover those sorts of bands, I think, and so that was our kind. And I guess for me, before when I was at school, I was very much involved with the school magazine. I used to really enjoy doing that. I'd write these great long science fiction and horror stories for like the school magazine, and then when I left school, as I say, that was about the time punk was starting. It was probably a year or two later. I actually got into doing my own fanzine. I'd go up on the train to Rough Trade in Portobello Road and Camden. What's the one in Camden? Compendium Books.
yeah.
And I just buy piles of all these fanzines, Toxic Graffiti, Ripped and Torn. Can't remember their names now. There were hundreds of these fans. It was like a real boom time, I think.
Mm.
And I buy piles of them and bring them home. And I just kind of avidly devour them, because you learn about all these bands like Crass and the pop group and the Slits, but it was kind of written. It wasn't the journalists, the professional journalists writing. It was like kids like you and me, as Sham would say, you know, sharing their sharing their wisdom, and that kind of really kind of motivated me, and thought I want to do one of these, and my mate Chris, we worked in the same, both worked in the tax office in Southend, and it was just like, yeah, well, why don't we do our own fanzine? And that was basically where it kind of came from. And initially we'd be covering, like the Southend punk scene. But then as it moved on, I think, started to talk to bands like Crass, or we'd interviewed Crass, and kind of went more in that direction. Then got a bit drawn into whole anarcho-punk thing. So it became a bit of an anarcho-punk zine after that. But yeah, it was good times, I think.
What was your introduction to anarcho-punk?
Well, I say it probably was crass. I mean, but I remember I used to go hunt saddling. Um, this would have been like 1978, 79, and we'd all go off in the countryside, to annoy the hunters and that. And there'd be kids or young people that would, meet, and they used to wear, have their green jackets on. And quite a lot of them had this little badge with crass on it, or, that little symbol. And I think it must be before they'd actually had any records out, or I certainly hadn't heard them. And it's like, who's this? What's this crass? What's that all about then? And, you know, kind of got drawn in through that, I suppose. And then you kind of get to hear crass. And they kind of, I think at that age, got these kind of quite confused politics running around in your head, sort of. Trying to think, the era. It would have been about the time, probably towards the end of the Callaghan government in 1979 or something. So we're kind of aware enough to know that, Labour wasn't working, as was that famous Tory party thing. Kind of the Tories would only ever work for their own class. Kind of the National Front were a Nazi front. And what was left? It was things like the SWP, Socialist Workers' Party, that seemed to be kind of addressing, and then, because I was kind of on the periphery of that kind of the SWP, that kind of thing. And then when I heard kind of Crass, or bought the first Crass record, it was like, it all makes sense now, suddenly everything kind of fell into place. And I guess that at that age, when you're kind of 17, 18, it kind of maybe it was the easy answers you were looking for to a degree, but I still, I think the central message of kind of Crass and the whole anarcho-punk thing, that whole do-it-yourself, the DIY thing, I think that's what really kind of the long-term takeaway from that, it's like, that kind of set me up for life, I guess,
Of
Yeah,
course,
the
they
whole
weren't operating
DIY.
in a vacuum with that, where there was all sorts of DIY going on.
Absolutely,
It
yeah.
ended up in rough trade and records, fanzines, etc. Yeah,
Because you had the very early Scritti Politti were very much like, it was easy. No, that was Desperate Bicycles, wasn't it? Easy.
yeah,
It was cheap.
yeah,
Go and do it. And you used to get those records. It told you on the sleeve how to make a record, and how much it would cost and where to go and all the rest of it. It was very kind of demystificatory, I think, and that kind of.
yeah,
I think that
yeah,
fed into the whole zine thing. And I guess nowadays my production values are a bit higher, but it's still basically I'm still doing zines basically.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's quite crazy times. I tell you, a band I don't think get enough credit is the Swell Maps, because
Yeah,
they were, you put one of their records on and it really did sound like it had been recorded in someone's bedroom or something. And
absolutely. Yeah.
well, God, I could do that. Yeah, yeah,
Well, we did. I was in a band called the Stripy Zebras, and we actually put out a tape called Live in Burnett's Bedroom, which was literally just recorded in my bedroom. I
yeah.
think I think I put on the cover of the tape. We recorded in front of an invited audience consisting of Burnett's cat, who made its excuses and left very early on.
Fantastic.
Which is a bit. I don't think many people got this. This is like a bit of a piss take of. Do you remember Throbbing Gristle did that album called Heathen Earth?
I know the name of it. I wasn't
No,
really.
well, and on the sleeve of that, it was saying, this is recorded live in front of the invited audience, and it was a bit of a piss take of that. But
Right. Cool. So, how long did the Stripy Zebras go for? How?
oh, not that long, a couple of years, something like that at the most. Um, yeah, we didn't do many gigs either. We only did like about probably no more than 10 gigs in our entire history. But we really were, people talk about DIY. We really were, like we used to when we did gigs and rehearsals, we used to take like amplifiers around in a wheelbarrow, around, so we like, going down the road with a wheelbarrow with with speakers and things, because none of us obviously had cars or anything, and we had no
Hmm.
other way of moving stuff about.
Yeah, yeah, crazy, crazy, and everyone had so much fun. back then,
Yeah,
didn't they, you know?
yeah. And I
Yeah,
think at the time we started to get to that point that we actually started to get a bit competent and actually good at playing our instruments. And our singer Martin, he decided that that's the time to split up, and I'm so glad we did, because at the time we were like, oh, we could maybe send a tape to John Peel and this, that, and the other. We could do a proper record. We could do a single. And he was like, no, that was never what it was about. And I'm really pleased about that now. In hindsight, that we just left this kind of almost like a perfect body of work, unsullied.
yeah, yeah. Keep it all. Yeah, keep a bit of a mystical kind of
Yeah,
image. Become a legend. Yeah,
yeah.
it's absolutely crazy since the internet came out. Just how all this stuff is known. In America and
Mm.
stuff like that. It's certainly something we would never have given a thought to back then.
Well, there's Michael Baxter, Penguin, who does
Yes.
the Kill with Pet Puppy site, and he puts up a load of recordings and stuff on his website. And there was one he put up. It was this Italian compilation punk single that came out in 1980, I think. And I remember being sent that record, like kind of when it came out, and it just made me think a lot about that process. Like back then, obviously this independent record label, someone in Italy had somehow found out about New Crimes, my fanzine. They kind of sent me a copy, and then you kind of write a review of it, and then it's probably at least another month before you kind of actually get around to printing it, and then that probably takes a few. Then you post those fanzines out to people, so probably at least another few days, a couple of weeks before people kind of get to read the review, and then somebody might think, oh, this Italian record, this record sounds really interesting. I'll send off for that. So you have to go down to the post office. Do you remember international monetary orders you used to get?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you just get some money changed up into these little kind of coupon things. And then they have to send those off to this Italian label. Then they'll probably take another 2 or 3 weeks of them. So it could be up to like 3 or 4 months to actually get to hear this record. Whereas, so there's a real investment in the process there. And
Yeah.
then it kind of reappears on, years and years later. It's on the Kill Your Pet Puppy site, and you can just click like that, and you can hear it like 5 seconds later. It just made me
Yeah.
think about that, how things have changed, and in terms of investment as well. That you'd really kind of you'd really want to hear that Italian punk record, like to make the effort to get hold of it. But now you can, oh yeah, that's all right. Next, move on to the next thing.
This is it. Everything's got so much more ephemeral. It's
Yeah, yeah,
all this stuff that was theoretically, what we wanted, all this kind of democratization and ability to do it yourself, etc. I just thought, yeah, that sounded like it was going to be victory, but it's been a very Pyrrhic victory in this respect.
yeah,
Yeah, because there's no centralization anymore. Therefore, you press a record, you've got no guarantee of even selling 1,000 or whatever. So, yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of weird the way it changed. So how
Mm.
long did New Crimes go for then?
I think that was 1980 to 84. It was either late 79 or very early 80, up to 84. And then, yeah, I was also going to do another one, but never quite, didn't get finished for whatever reason, which
Mm,
was a shame because it was going in some quite interesting directions then. I think, it kind of moved through the, anarcho-punk thing, and it was sort of coming out the other side. I got a little bit disenchanted with the whole anarcho. I remember, as probably do yourself, the autonomy centre in Wapping,
yes.
and it got kind of, it got kind of felt a bit weird there towards the end. It seemed to get kind of quite sort of cliquey, and anarcho-punk seemed to become very insular and inward looking. It was kind of people, um, if you're wearing the wrong, the wrong shoes, or you had leather boots on, or you're eating some crisps with, a bit of cheese powder in or something, that you'd get. It became very kind of purist as well. And I think I kind of moved out the other side of that and was going in these other directions. But yeah, never actually did get that last issue all the final issue done. Well, apart from I put one together to go with the book I was just showing you, but
Okay. Right.
so but that was the kind of, because I did a Kickstarter for that, a crowdfunder. So
Oh
it
yeah.
was kind of crowdfunders kind of reward, and you know, the legendary issue of New Crimes 8 that never came out, and I kind of put that together. It was kind of like outtakes, really, like little bits of interviews that I couldn't quite fit in, and photos I couldn't use, and things like that. But so technically, there was like a 38-year gap.
Yeah, that's mad. How much did you raise then? On this
um, I covered my costs. It was about a bit over. I think I actually raised about £4,000 in the end. I put in for £3,000, which was cover printing costs, and of course between putting in, you know, how things, you know, are moving financially, I think the price of, you know, I got a quote from the printers, put my crowdfunder schedule based on that, and in between we'd had kind of quite a hike in printing prices, so I'm glad I did that, really, because I actually went over the target, and most of that was swallowed up by the increase in the size of the bill. But so
and
it goes.
how can people get hold of it?
They can get that through my website, which is spiralseed.co.uk. I can send you that as a link, and you can stick it in
Yeah,
somewhere. Yeah,
yeah, I'll do that. I'll put it under the video. So
cool.
if you're looking on the video, it's just down there. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Okay, yeah, I shall add that. Yeah. And how much is it?
25 quid.
Oh,
Yeah, so I
yeah.
mean it's quite a hefty publication. It's I've got it here. You know, it's quite thick, a lot of pages. So
Oh, it is. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's not a flimsy volume by any means. I mean, a
No,
couple of people were like amazed, and I'm amazed you found that much to talk about in Southend's kind of alternative scene. And actually, I only scratched the surface, and you know, then all these other things start to come to light. And you know, people come up to me, well, you haven't really covered the Southend reggae scene and all that kind of. No, but maybe that can be your book that you can write next. You know, so.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So was New Crimes a Southend? Did it have a local emphasis then?
The early issues did, yeah, and I say by the about third or fourth issue, because I was getting kind of quite into the. It was that time when there was a lot of that tape trade. You remember when people used to trade tapes, where you could
Mm,
send a stamped address envelope and a tape, and people would
yeah.
fill it up with their music, and yeah, so there was a lot of that going on, you know. So it became a lot more kind of nationally based, because we'd be writing to all these people from all over the country and all over the world, in fact. So yeah, so
Right.
it definitely moved into, you know, had a broader base after like the third or fourth issue.
Soaping the stamps as well.
Yeah, soaping the stamps. Yeah,
God. Yeah. Which, for the benefit of anyone who doesn't know, you put a thin layer of soap over a stamp so that the person at the other end could wash the, what's it called, the postmark off and then reuse the stamp.
yeah,
Pretty crazy, really, isn't that? Because it started off, I think, with sellotape, just
that's it.
sellotaping over the stamp, but then they got a bit wise to that. So
Yeah,
soap was the kind of take two on it. Yeah, blimey. Yeah, everybody used to write to each other at that time, didn't they? It's
yeah, yeah.
quite mad. I'd forgotten about that.
It was that kind of social media back then, wasn't it? You know, it's a bit
Yeah.
more slow motion. Nowadays, you can kind of have a row with someone, you know, face to face, more or less, within seconds. But then, you know, you'd have your rows
Yeah.
like in more slow motion. It would like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've forgotten all about that. That's quite mad. So, were you a vegan at this time then?
No, I was vegetarian. I think I became vegan probably about well, it was 1984 that she became vegan. So
That's pretty early on in terms of uh, what kind of food was available. I presume.
yeah, yeah. Well, I actually became vegetarian in 1977, which was, you know, I think that was the two sort of significant things that for me, you know, discovering punk and discovering that you could kind of be a vegetarian. Because it wasn't really a thing back
Mm,
then. I guess it was, but you know, for someone of my age and background, you know, in Southend on Sea,
yeah.
I
Well,
think you mentioned actually what was, you know, early recollections, things that kind of moments that maybe inform who you are later on in life. I've got a very clear memory. I must have been 5 or 6 years old, and we go round to my nan and granddad's for Sunday lunch. And in the morning, my granddad would take me, we go for like walks in the like countryside quite nearby. We go in his car and we park up, so we go for a little walk in the countryside and see kind of like, cows in the field or sheep in the field. And, he'd be patting the cow on the head. And then it's like, we're going home for lunch now. And, it'd be roast beef. And I even at that young age, hang on, I was just patting, that cow in the field, and now here it is on my plate. And I remember that really clearly. And it kind of, and I never
like
liked meat, because I think I always made that connection. And one of my another really early memories was at school with school dinners. I used to cut the meat into tiny little pieces so I could swallow it without chewing it, because I hated the texture so much. And then when, let's say about 1977, be slightly older kids, those like young people from the council, to me they seemed a lot older. They're probably only about 18 or 19 themselves, but they were kind of vegetarian. Yeah, you can be one of those. Oh yeah, I'll do that then. And my mum thinking, well, that won't last long. And that was like,
yeah. Give it 6
you'll
weeks.
grow out of that. And
yeah.
Yeah. And like, nearly 50 years later, so here we are,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember one of my mum's friends saying it's just a phase he's going through, right in front of me, really patronising, but there we go. Yeah. So so I guess when you became vegetarian, you probably relied on the local hippie shop or something, the local health shop, which were all kind of run by hippies back then, weren't they, basically?
Yeah. And well, to my shame, I was, reliant on what my mum was able to get. I'd tell my mum to get stuff from the supermarket. Probably wasn't until a little bit later when I kind of left home I was able to track down my own food. But there was that contradiction. We're running around being anarchists and that, and still living in our mums and dads, half of us.
Yeah. Was Protoveg around in 1970?
It was, yes, that was the thing. Yeah, I remember that was TVP. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Which I was never
Sosmix.
that keen. And sauce mix, that's still a staple in our house to this day, is sauce mix. So
Can you get Sosmix?
not so easily. You have to order it online now. You can't just go down the shop and buy it anymore. But we
I used to love Sosmix. It was, well,
yeah.
certainly after Protoveg, it was a big step
Yeah.
up.
Well, I never liked that because it was a little bit too meaty for my you know. I get why people who like the taste of meat but don't want to eat it anymore buy that stuff. But I never liked the taste of meat to start with, so never really got it with
There's
why
a
would you
whole
kind of
sort of load of food now, obviously in supermarkets. Even people at Bird's Eye making stuff. Even McDonald's did something, didn't they?
yeah
But I think it's really quite weird that there is such a. I mean, maybe it's helpful, but there's such a drive to make it like meat, and uh, and also I think the other sort of real development. I mean, that stuff was never actually health food, I suppose, but these days, it's quite possible to be a completely unhealthy vegan, isn't it? Essentially,
absolutely.
with all that kind of stuff.
I'm actually writing a piece at this very moment, well, not this very moment, but about that very thing. But it's a thing I've been it's been floating around, because there is this sort of upsurge in veganism at the moment, as you say. You get plant-based stuff all over the place. But say not only is it not healthy in many ways, but the kind of implications in terms of agriculture are kind of very much the same, really. How can I put this without sounding too provocative? I don't know. I'm on some kind of vegan Facebook groups, and a lot of people say I couldn't care less about the ecological footprint of the food I eat. I'm just vegan for the animals. And then when you look at the the figures for soy production, I think I haven't got the figures to hand. I would have had if I was still with my thing I'm writing on. But it was something like the area of Brazil that is devoted to soy production, something like 30 million square miles, no, can't be square miles, hectares, I'm not sure. It's a lot of land anyway. Apparently it's an area the size of the Philippines. And if you put together all the land that is used worldwide for soy production, it's something like the same area as I think it's Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands all combined or something, which is an awful lot of habitat, you know. If you look at photos, it's just like kind of monoculture, miles and miles and miles, just flat land, growing nothing but soy, being kind of like mechanically harvested. That's an awful lot of habitat that is, you know, being lost for a diet that is for the animals, kind of thing.
I thought most soy was for actually for meat production.
It is, you're quite right, yeah. So perhaps that's a little bit unfair, but it's still the same kind of agricultural model, I think, you know.
Right.
But actually, I think, you know, the other thing, I remember like the 70s and 80s, there used to be, do you remember you used to go to like health food shops or whole food shops and there'd be those little booklets, was it Lifespan? They used to do the Lifespan Cooperative. They used to publish these little kind of A5 little pamphlets that'd be full of kind of like vegan recipes and things, you know, using nuts and beans and fresh veg. And I think that's very much, you know, there are all these, you know, and there always was, you know, if you're starting from raw, you know, base ingredients rather than kind of processed stuff. I don't know, that you can have a really diverse and healthy diet, I think, still, without having that kind of ecological footprint of the you know, the mass-produced soy and, you know, your Impossible burgers and this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, on the, you know, on the other hand, I am pleased that, you know, these alternatives are there. You know, your Greggs sausage roll, I'm pleased that, you know, I well, not so much, but certainly before the COVID and everything, I'd be traveling about quite a lot, doing teaching here, there, and everywhere. And you tend to spend a lot of time sitting on cold station platforms waiting for trains and things. It's nice you can just pop to the Greggs and get a, you know, something hot to eat. So there are all these positives. And also, of course, that the conversations are happening, you know, and these ideas that were very fringe back in our day. You know what I mean? Sound like we're on our last legs. But, from the time where maybe, you know, a few years back when we were like maybe more kind of campaigning and into all that stuff, yeah, that it is becoming. I've kind of lose my thread there slightly, but I think you get the point. You know, that it's becoming. You know, it's on the that side of, you know, things seem to be moving in a positive direction, I think.
Yeah, well, that leads us quite nicely onto vegan permaculture.
Okay.
Obviously, I've got no idea who listens to these podcasts, but I suspect that a significant amount of people will have heard the word permaculture, not know what it is, and then you've put the word vegan in front of it, and so the combination of those two things is something else we could sort of have a look at as well, I guess. So should we start with what is permaculture?
Oh, here we go. It's that the question every permaculture practitioner hates being asked. I think it's really kind of quite difficult to actually get a definition. And in fact, when I run a course, the first kind of session we do is called "What is permaculture?" and we spend about an hour trying to get pinned down a definition of what is permaculture. But I guess for me, the quick one would be creating sustainable human, or designing sustainable human habitats by following nature's patterns. Yes, I think there can be this misnomer that, you know, permaculture, it's all about gardening, but it kind of isn't really. It's more about, you know, I guess it's design thinking. So it's conscious design thinking. It's kind of pattern thinking, if you like, you know, seeing the patterns in the world, patterns in nature, patterns in human behavior, patterns in time, and applying those. I think it's quite an open source thing as well. That's a big thing for me in permaculture. There's all these ideas out there, and people have written books and this, that, and the other. But just like open source software, you can take that stuff, adapt it, use it, and change it to what makes sense to you. And the other thing is it's kind of regenerative thinking as well. I already use the term sustainable when I'm kind of like, I find the term sustainable kind of a bit problematic these days. Because if you look up the definition of sustainability, or sustainable means, can be continued into perpetuity. And I was thinking, this time we're in, ecological collapse and terrible things that are kind of happening, and is it enough to be sustainable anymore, or do we need to kind of leave things actually better than we found them? And that's why I kind of prefer the term regenerative. So it's actually not about mitigating against the damage that's been done, but it's also kind of actively, practices that can kind of build soils and get more trees into the ground or restore our watercourses. And also the community stuff that's going to kind of regenerate communities. So I think it's quite a big, it's about more than gardening, shall we say.
Right. That's, I didn't
Glad
know
you
that.
asked now, aren't you?
Yeah. But when you do one of your permaculture courses, what are you actually teaching people or sharing with people, or how does it all work?
I guess really it is, we'll talk about, I mentioned that kind of about pattern and stuff like that. And it's about permaculture principles and about, the ethic. There's three kind of ethics of permaculture. It's kind of earth care, care for people or people care, and this notion of fair shares, that to meet the needs of the earth whilst meeting the needs of people, rather to meet the needs of people without exploiting or being extractive towards, the planet, that there has to be this kind of notion of setting limits to our consumption, I guess, living within our means. So it's those kind of ethics. Various kind of principles of permaculture. There's a whole load of them. I won't run them off now. And getting to think about, how can you, on a course, probably would be thinking about how can you apply this stuff in your own life, really? These are the ethics, these are the principles, whole load of design methodologies and structures and tools that we'll introduce. And at the end of the week, if it's a weekend or a day course, think about when you go away from here, what can you take from this that you can apply to your own life here and now, I guess. And then there's the longer 2-week course, which obviously goes into a lot more depth. We'll talk about, a lot more kind of practical techniques and stuff. We'll talk about things like forest gardening, kind of sustainable architecture, all kinds of things we'll be kind of talking about, and a lot of stuff around, the systems thinking. Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of people go on these courses?
It's the whole range, really. Everybody, I think the thing that brings people, the common, people be of all ages, all backgrounds, very, very varied. But I think the commonality that always comes, we always get people at the start of the course to kind of tell their own story, a little bit like you did at the start of this. What's your own story? Where are you from? How did you come to be at this point? And the commonality that always comes out is that people kind of reach the point in their life that they want to see change. I think, like whether it's their own life and the way they're living their life is kind of unsustainable, or the way, the wider picture of the world, is unsustainable. It's people who want to see change, and positive change. I'd say that's the commonality.
Do you feel optimistic regarding positive change?
Probably up to a couple of years ago, I would have said yes. And we shouldn't say I don't feel optimistic. I think, the way thing, when it was the start of the COVID thing, and what we were seeing at the start, that we were seeing a lot of kind of mutual, there are a lot of mutual aid, a lot of kind of support going on, and that all kind of very quickly seemed to fall apart, and all these horrible kind of divisions seem to come out. When you see, some of the debates around, or debates, is that even a term to be used in this context? Just about wearing a little piece of material over your mouth for like a couple of times a day, and the vitriol that was around that kind of stuff. You think, yeah, and that's really not a big ask, is it? Just so
No, quite.
and then to actually be asking people, that we're actually going to have to make some pretty serious changes if we're going to get through things like climate change, and so many people were kind of manipulating that behind the scenes. It does make you feel, do I feel optimistic? Well, I do, yeah, I think I do, because there are, in a way, that's the kind of narrative that you see on kind of social media and the news and this, that, and the other. But actually, you do still see a lot of people are doing a lot of stuff that's kind of really kind of inspiring, I think. People have got like community projects going, like garden projects going. Yeah, there are an awful lot of reasons for kind of hope, I think, and optimism.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I do think, why am I doing this? Like,
Well, you wouldn't be human if you didn't have
no,
doubts, would you?
absolutely,
We all have those days, really, where we sort of wished we'd stayed in bed and nothing seems right, and so
yeah.
on. Yeah.
And I think there's also something about, I think it may have been Penny Rambo, from Crass, that, I think that's another thing I kind of took from them, in a way that, in a way, it kind of doesn't matter what the world is doing, as long as your own kind of ethics are intact. I think there's,
Yeah.
I think, there was another quote. I'm trying to think of it. Guy said something along the lines of, no matter, what's going on. I think, I'm kind of getting a bit befuddled with my thinking here. But I remember actually having this a few years back, around the time I was kind of moving into kind of permaculture and getting interested in permaculture. I think for me, as you know, quite a similar background to you, the whole punk thing. And, there was a lot of kind of protest, and a lot that we were kind of always kind of seem to be kicking against something. Well, I think, it was the poll tax, it was, the road protests, it was kind of, campaign for nuclear disarmament, the animal rights stuff. There was always, we were kicking against something, protesting against something. And I think it gets to the point, there'd be something, we, in inverted commas, would kind of win or lose on one struggle or another. And then they, in inverted commas, they'd have the next thing lined up. It's like, we kind of like won on the poll tax, and then straight away the Criminal Justice Act comes. There's always something else. They never stop. They never bloody stop, do they? And, particularly at the moment. And I think for me, it got to that point where you can either you can burn out. I think that happens to a lot of people from our time, the complete burnout, or you just become, just kind of walk away from it, sort of thing. And I think that was about the time I picked. It was in the probably the late 1990s or mid 1990s, and I picked up this book called The Permaculture Garden by a guy called Graham Bell. And at the time I had an allotment, and I was growing quite a lot of veg on my allotment, and I'd heard of permaculture, and I heard, it's got something to do with herb spirals. I was at the book, it'll tell me how to make herb spirals, and it'll have like other kind of handy gardening tips in it. So I bought this book, took it away, read it. It didn't have anything about herb spirals, and but it was kind of very much about what it was about was like, I would say, solutions-based thinking, and it was almost like a switching point. So much of my focus had been on what I was against,
On the problems, the
problems, nuclear war, animal rights, apartheid, where it was. And this book kind of like, what are you actually for? And I think that was a real kind of switching point in kind of how my own mind worked. And yeah, and I think, you know, I was kind of not sure how I got to that point. But yeah, I do remember we were talking about and it was the time of, I think it was the Criminal Justice Act, I think, and there was a big protest in London. And I remember meeting someone at the Anarchist Book Fair, and they said, "Oh, were you at the criminal justice thing last week? You know, it all kicked off and turned it, you know, punch up or whatever. And were you there?" And I said, "No, I was in my garden pruning my apple trees." And we had, I wouldn't say an argument, but I just felt that was, you know, the thing that kind of, that's where I belonged at that point, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So vegan permaculture then, how do those two words fit together, or those two concepts?
Um, yeah, well, the reason myself and Nicole, the woman I used to work with, that we ran the courses, was because people asked us to, basically, because, you know, we were both involved in the permaculture movement and we're both vegan, and I suppose we had that kind of take on it, and just people were saying, you know, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if there was a vegan permaculture course?" And we just thought, well, let's do that then, you know. So that's kind of how it came about. And I think there can be a bit of, you know, actually the idea of vegan permaculture is actually quite absurd. The idea that you can have an actual animal-free food growing systems. And why would you want to? Because, you know, you've got earthworms that are turning the soil. You've got kind of your bees that are kind of fertilizing stuff. You've got frogs and toads that are sort of like controlling, um, you know, unwelcome insects. But I think so. The actual idea of it being an animal-free permaculture is actually kind of quite absurd. But what we would, and the term Nicole used to use was self-willed. You know, of course, animals can be on your land and in your garden, but they're going to be kind of self-willed. They're not. It's not from an exploitative relationship. So these earthworms and frogs and butterflies and dragonflies and whatever are kind of there because they kind of choose to be there, rather than, you know, your chickens, your pigs, and your cows, that kind of where the relationship is, you know, well, arguably an exploitative relationship. Yeah, so I guess that would be the quick definition, or the quick.
Is
Um,
it growing, the whole permaculture thing?
I think so. Yeah, as I say, yeah. And getting to be a little bit more kind of mainstream. I think you can get Permaculture magazine in WH Smith's, you know, used
Okay.
to be kind of quite a fringe publication that you had to kind of make quite an effort to track down. But now
Yeah.
you can go into WH Smith's and buy it. And yeah, and there's kind of quite a lot of books and literature around that have nice glossy, you know, higher production values, rather than the kind of, you know, a lot of the early permaculture publications weren't too different from our kind of fanzines and stuff, you know, Gestecnerd and, or, you know, kind of photocopied pamphlets that would be passed around, you know.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
definitely, you know, I think, and even if people aren't calling it permaculture, I think, you know, that doesn't really matter, you know, it's just a word, you know. I
So
think it's, you know, people are doing community gardens, people are taking, you're Brighton, aren't you? You're down in Brighton.
Lewis now, just outside
Lewis,
Brighton.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think you, well, I know Stammer Park in Brighton. I think it's quite a big permaculture. You got this Brighton Permaculture Network. They're doing a lot of stuff at Stammer Park. They do a lot of growing there. They built the Earth. Have you ever visited the Earthship at Stammer Park?
Earthship. Sounds like
Yeah,
something
no,
I could guess at.
right.
No, I haven't.
It's kind of basically a building that's kind of made of all kind of recycled materials. It's kind of off grid, you know, solar
All right.
powered, wind powered. It's built from kind of old tires they filled up with earth, basically. So hence Earthship. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
well worth a
no, I
visit if
haven't.
you're.
Yeah, I used to go there quite a lot, but
Oh right,
COVID sort of, because Summer Park's right next to the university,
that's
which is
right.
full of
Yeah,
students who are full of COVID. So I've been kind of
yeah,
avoiding it a bit, really. But oh, I'll check that out. I had no idea about that. It's only just down the road from me. It's like one stop on the train. So
that's right. Yeah, because you know we sometimes stay in Brighton and we go to Lewis for the day, and it is, you know, yeah, very close.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's
So you got
interesting.
some, because you've got Harvey's Brewery, haven't we?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been in the Gardeners a few times. You probably know the Gardeners.
I do indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite an idiosyncratic type place, really, and that
Yeah.
pub's quite typical of that idiosyncrasy, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Harvey's
we do
Brewery.
like
People
Lewis.
people are really, really loyal to that around here.
Yeah.
Really loyal to it. You know, they won't. Some people won't go in a pub if it hasn't got Harvey's beer in. But
And there's another one we go in, which is just around the corner from there. It's sort of it's on the canal or a river. Is it a river or a canal? I'm not sure.
it's a river. A pub on the river.
Yeah,
You got the
Harvey's Pub.
Riverside
It's very,
Cafe.
very near the, very, very near the brewery. I can't think what it's called though.
I'm not sure where you mean really. You got the Gardeners. If you come up, you got the Volunteer, which is next to Waitrose. I'm sure this is absolutely fascinating for people to listen to. But you got the Depot, of course, which is the cinema. That's where I quite often drink. That got me through COVID because it's got a big outside garden basically, and they do serve booze. So that was about the safest place, really. Yeah. Have you had COVID, incidentally?
Well, touch wood, no, I haven't actually. Which is me and my wife. So far, to the best of our knowledge, unless we've had it kind of, been non-symptomatic. Well, I say I've got a bit of cold at the moment, which could be COVID. I must admit I haven't had a test, but to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't caught up with us yet. Practically everybody I know, apart from us, has had it.
Yeah, that's the same with us. We haven't had it, but we seem to be the only people around here who haven't, basically.
Right.
You were talking about permaculture magazines
Oh
and
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and so on, which led me on to thinking about your books that you've written, and certainly a
Uh-huh.
couple of which I've got. So I've got your vegan recipe book, for instance. It's Well Fed, Not an Animal
Oh
Dead.
yeah, the old classic. Yeah,
That whole thing, and it includes your artwork as well, doesn't it? Of
it
course,
does. Yeah,
it's also pretty kind of individual stuff, I think. So yeah, that kind of seems like a natural follow on from the whole fanzine thing with new crimes, etc.
yeah, yeah.
How did you get into that? Did you see it as a follow on because you already knew how to do the technical
I
bits?
think it was. Yeah, I think the big takeaway from the whole fanzine thing for me was actually how much it demystified the process of printing and publishing. And I guess that I'm not alone in that, because there was this kind of quite a mystique around that, wasn't there? That you had to kind of, you'd write you know
Yeah,
a novel or a manuscript, and then you send it round to publishers, and half of them or they'd all reject it, and then eventually someone would accept it, and you kind of and I actually found, well, actually, there's no need to do that. You can print it yourself, you can distribute it yourself. Obviously, I think there are certain. I've had my vegan permaculture book, the vegan book of permaculture, actually published by um, Permanent, who do a permaculture magazine, and there are obviously advantages there, and they've got probably a bigger reach in terms of distribution and things like that. But by and large, kind of just being in control of the whole process oneself is something that, yeah, which I think got, actually from the fanzine thing. I
mm,
mean, the next thing, after New Crimes, um, we're taken, up to kind of the late or mid to late 1980s was the time of the miners' strike and all that. And here in Southend, we kind of started up our own kind of anarchist group to kind of support the miners and the peace camps. That was a big thing at that time as well, like Greenham Common and Mumsworth and all that. So we'd be kind of supporting, so we used to produce a kind of newsletter that kind of, there was a lot more of the moment. I think, New Crimes, you probably take, 3 or 4 months to go and get an issue together. But this, the Southend Anarchist newsletter, we get that out kind of quite quickly and just distribute on the streets and here, there, and everywhere. And then after that, again, just having that kind of skill set, then I started putting out little kind of pamphlets, really, one kind of single issue pamphlets. I did like a gardening one called Dig for Revolution, which is all about, getting an allotment and How to Grow Your Own Veg. There was the one you mentioned, the Well Fed, Not an Animal Dead, that focused. I did that basically, the early version of that, which is like a little A6, like 10-page pamphlet thing, because I got, it was that time I became vegan, and people would, you'd always get into these arguments with people, or, people wanting to know why you were vegan or this, that, and the other. So rather than having that kind of rather tedious discussion over and over again, I just say, here, I'm giving a little booklet, and it had, my kind of reasons in there, and then a load of recipes and stuff. And then that kind of grew into a bigger thing. So it became those kind of single issue pamphlets. And then, yeah, just over time, I guess it just developed into, Spiral Seed, which is, my kind of self-publishing venture, enterprise, business. I suppose we all shy away from those sort of words, like business and, former punks and anarchist type. But it is, it is my kind, my livelihood, that and teaching and doing various projects and things. So, yeah.
Are you still selling the books?
Yeah, definitely. Same website as you. Yeah, it's funny, really, because I guess the Southend On Zine book feels a little bit of a tangent from all of that. And I was thinking, and you were probably the person I should have spoke to about this, of setting up another website to kind of, that was around marketing that, 'cause it's a slightly different, it feels a little bit off topic from most of the stuff I do. But in the end, I just want to, maybe I'll do that later, but for now, I've just added it to the, it's quite funny, you've got all these books about, sprouting your own seeds and making your ferments and doing your gardening and making a forest garden, and the Southend fanzine culture plonked in the middle of it all, but which feels a little bit incongruous, but it's okay, I guess.
It is okay, yeah. I think sometimes people from our background can worry a little bit too much about everything being congruent, truthfully.
Yeah.
I know I do. So
Yeah.
yeah. It's the John Harvey Tavern, that pub you were
John
thinking.
Harvey, that's the one, yeah.
Yeah. had to get that in.
Yeah.
The risk of sounding like a bit of an Alan Partridge moment. Yeah. So how many of these books do you sell? I mean, I guess you've probably sold quite a lot over the years now.
Well, the permaculture beginner's guide, which is probably the first one that kind of stepped up from being a little pamphlet kind of thing. I think the initial print run, I had to borrow some money off a friend. I think I borrowed about 2,000 quid for 3,000. It was either 2,000 quid for 3,000 copies or 3,000 quid for two. I can't remember, but that was about 20 years ago, and got that printed by Footprint Workers Cooperative, who are based in Leeds. And quite funny, they've got connections with Chumbawamba and all that kind of stuff as well.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it was quite weird because I'd written and produced this. Do you remember those Readers and Writers Cooperative? Do you remember them that used to do Marx for beginners and Freud for beginners? And they were like cartoon
kind of books.
Yeah, they were like cartoon books all about kind of, but they weren't kind of written in a patronising, they made the ideas kind of quite clear and well presented in like cartoon format, but not in a way that was kind of patronising. And I wanted to do something like that because the books, as I said, the books around permaculture 25 years ago, you got the Permaculture Designer's Manual, which is this great big, like 600-page tome. And some of the other books, they were kind of quite dense in terms of ideas. And I found them really kind of quite heavy going. And I think one of my skills actually is to take those kind of ideas and I can kind of put them out in a kind of more accessible way. I think, I can, it takes me a while to absorb ideas. When I have, I can say, so what you're saying is, and put it in a more, and I think that's what I wanted to do with this permaculture beginner's guide. And I wanted to kind of model it on those, those books that used to be around in the 70s. So I'd written this book and it was, I'd done it all on desktop publishing, which was a new thing for me then. And so I had kind of the files all laid out as I wanted. That took about 4 years to get all that together. And thinking, now what do I do with it? Do I just kind of print, the usual thing of like run off 50 on the work photocopier sort of thing, which was, the standard practice of those times, or do I want to kind of upscale? I put 4 years work into this. Do I want to kind of upscale it a bit? And I was having those kind of internal debates and discussions, and this flyer came through my door from this Footprint Workers Co-op saying, we're a workers cooperative. We've just bought ourselves a lithographic press. We don't really know how to use it, but after we've done your project, we'll know a lot more about. This was their standard marketing thing, which most
We
people
don't know
wouldn't
how
know a
to
million
use it.
miles.
Right. Yeah.
But we've got a rough idea how to use this, litho press, but we'll know more about it when we've done your project. And most people probably run 100 miles from marketing like that. But I was like, yes, these sound like exactly the sort of people I want to work with. And so I kind of, got in touch with them and went up to their place in Leeds. And it was kind of, they had this kind of stuff in the garden from when they had a Chumbawamba gig there. And I think actually in the house, they had this kind of, all the props that were left over the gig kind of lying about in their garden. And oh yeah, they're obviously kind of, from that whole anarcho background. And so that was the initial printing I did with them. And so that was, I can't remember, it was 2,000, it was 3,000 copies that they did. And I borrowed some money off a friend to raise that cash. I didn't have that sort of cash at the time. So I was able to pay him back. And then I've reprinted it. Well, I think it must have sold over 10,000 by now, which is probably not too bad. And it's been translated into I think French, Croatian, Hebrew. I didn't even know about the Hebrew edition. I just came across a PDF of it online. Nobody even asked permission to do that one, but so by and large, it's probably about 10,000 of the Permaculture Beginner's Guide now.
That's a hell of a lot, isn't it? Really, you must be really happy about that.
Yeah. I'm kind of feeling maybe it needs updating a bit now. I'm looking at it thinking some of this stuff seems a bit out of date now, but yeah.
And do you still do the artwork and stuff?
Yeah.
That kind of really lends a flavour to the whole thing as well. I think it sort of put me a little bit in mind of Clifford Harper's art.
Yeah, he's
I
a
don't know
very
if
big
that's
influence. Yeah.
sort of pictures of what might be, I suppose.
Yeah, again, that may be slightly utopian, rather than. I mean, that was another thing that got me, back in the fanzine. There'd always be, the imagery was always around kind of death and war and destruction and horrible things happening. Thinking like the Crass record covers or Discharge, for example. There'd always have, pictures of people blown up and this, that, and the other, and there'd always be like people would always cut up those animal aid leaflets, wouldn't they? Like animals being experimented on and things like that. And the rows of skulls, that was a classic, wasn't it, in the old fanzines? From the C&D leaflet, they'd take that row of skulls and stick them in everywhere. But I always thought, why do we always dwell upon that, that horrible imagery, rather than, imagery of stuff we'd like to see, how things could look, the better world we want to kind of create. So, I've got the T-shirt on, so if you can see it. Yeah. Another world is possible.
Ah, yes.
my favourite T-shirt. Because I think, that is that. Yeah, you asked the question before about, optimism. Am I optimistic? And I think that's what I'll always come back to. Well, another world is possible, and
Greenpeace used to have I think it was Greenpeace used to have a saying, better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And,
definitely. Yeah, and I think that's probably, I think that's where I'm still coming from.
Yeah. You've got a pub and you've got a pub. There's a pub in Southend called the Railway. No, not you. There exists a pub called the Railway, doesn't there?
Not any longer, unfortunately.
Oh, is it not there now?
No, unfortunately not. It never reopened after COVID, unfortunately. It was very. It was kind of a bit sad because they were struggling financially for a while, and a little bit before COVID, they just about turned the corner, and they just about kind of becoming kind of, you know, profitable again, and things are starting to look up. And then of course everything's shut, and then they kind of reopened again in that, you know, that weird period that we had when, you know, like sort of towards the end of 2020, when you kind of you know, when it was all about the
Eat out to help out and all that.
yeah, and then after that it was the substantial meals and all that kind of business, and all that, you know, this kind of, I don't know, because the railway was such a kind of vibrant, lively place. And then, you know, when you go there, you know, you're only allowed like in a room with a capacity for about, you know, 200 people. They'd only have, you know, I think about 40 people in there for safety sort of thing, you know. And
Yeah.
so we went through that kind of weird period, and then they closed again, and then they just were never able to reopen, unfortunately. So that was a very, very sad time.
It seemed to be a place that had quite a lot of sympathy for various things, like you had live music, didn't you? But also you had
Mm,
a crass burger.
that's right. Yeah.
How on earth
Yeah.
did that?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah. Yeah, there was just so much about the railway. It was just such a cool place. And Dave and Fee, who, you know, they're a couple that kind of ran the place. Um, yeah, they were into crass. They were into you know, all music really, and all culture. You know, it supported so much stuff used to happen there. Um, yeah, because you had the gigs. Like, I think it was live music like every night of the week. You know, like Wednesday nights would be jazz, Tuesday was kind of blues. There'd be kind of indie nights. You know, there was just something every night, live music. Um, but not only that, there were kind of, you know, they put on cinema clubs, they put on plays, like theatre stuff. It was just like this one, you know, this whole cultural centre that was around this kind of this one building, which was like amazing, really.
It's a
And
real shame that that doesn't thrive, isn't it? Because it sounds like it would, but
well, the trouble is, it's a very old building. It's old Victorian, one of the oldest buildings in Southend. Um, and just physically, you know, the actual structure of the building, it was, you know, a hotel at one time, but it was really kind of dilapidated, and it just needed so, you know, it's like a real money pit, I think, you know, in terms of,
yeah.
you know, maintenance and trying to kind of, you know, like you go to the toilet there, and if it was raining, because you have to go down this like little corridor to get to the men's toilet, and if it was raining, there'd just be water pouring through the seat. It was like being in, you know, going down in being in the Indiana Jones film or something, you know, going down this corridor with this water pouring down and buckets all over the place, and you know, so just all those kind of physical, you know, structural things, I think, is what, you know,
I've seen photos of you playing there, I believe,
yeah.
with your guitar.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do? What kind of stuff do you play? Because that brings us nicely around to the sort of start with stripy zebras and so on, really.
Um, yeah, the pictures you've probably seen were probably we do a thing called jump up and join in. That was it's just to put a little bit of context on it.
Hmm.
One of the things, you know, like I say, the people who ran the railway, they're kind of really like incredibly creative people who just like anything goes, and any ideas that people have, you know, they're up for. And one day, you know, I was just sort of chatting to Dave one day, and he was asking, you know, what's permaculture? I was telling him all that, you know, what permaculture is, probably getting down that kind of convoluted conversation I just had with you about what is permaculture. And he was like, yeah, it'd be great to grow some veg in the garden here. And like at the time, the garden there, or the garden, it's a yard, and it was just full of broken furniture and rubbish and crap and everything. And I said, well, let's kind of do it then. You know, half the time people have these conversations in the pub, and when you kind of sober the next morning, they're just kind of forgotten. But kind of got fired up by that one. I was like, yeah, let's do that then. Because in my day job at the time, I worked in a day centre around the corner for adults with learning disabilities, and we're always looking for kind of community projects for them to get involved in. And so we thought, yeah, we'll make that a thing. So at the back of the railway, we kind of converted it into um, this little kind of food growing. You know, we put in raised beds and compost and stuff like that. And yeah, and it was with the guys from the day centre where I worked. And then what kind of came from that was that because it was getting people more visible. You know, there's two things going on there. One, it was introducing people who might not have opportunities to just do things like go down the pub and have a pint and things that other people might take for granted. But it also kind of makes those people more kind of visible in the community as well. So from that, it was like we started this Friday afternoon music group down there. Called Jump Up and Join In. So it's once a month we'd run it, and it was kind of the setup was it was an open mic. And what did we say on the publicity? Anybody is welcome, but people with learning disability are especially welcome. So it wasn't a club for people with disabilities. It was like, you know, just trying to be more inclusive, really. And we had a real kind of punk ethos to that as well, you know. So quite often, stuff that might be laid on for people, you know, musical things might be kind of, you know, the music's bit crap really a lot of time, you know. So if you're happy and you know, clap, you know, join in everybody. And we want to get well away from that. So we'd be doing punk songs. We used to do that. Hurry Up Harry, you know, we're going down the pub, and everyone would love that. And the Ramones, you know, Hey Ho, Let's Go, was it Blitzkrieg Bop, and yeah, so they were probably the images you'd have seen of me kind of playing down there. And it was very sad, obviously, when that came to an end as well, when the railway closed down. But we've got a new home for that. There's another pub around the corner called the Alex, and we run stuff there now. So
Fantastic. So you're keeping busy, which is great.
just a bit, yeah.
Do you have much spare time then, or are you just doing stuff all the time?
Uh, yeah, you know, what is spare time? It's like, yeah, there's always something going on. So
That's
yeah,
fantastic. I've really enjoyed this. I think that's probably a
yeah, great.
good place to finish. So I'll thank you off camera afterwards. But for now, I think I would say if people want to buy your books, including the Southend On Zine one, they go to spiralseed.co.uk and can take it from there, or even just get in touch with you to be if they're interested in what you're up to, I guess. So yeah, thank you very much, Graham Burnett. That's been fantastic, and I hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have. And oops, I almost clicked to end the recording there. So, okay, so yeah, once I've got the hang of this technology, I'm trying to talk and do something at once. You know, it's not my speciality. So yeah, anyway, having waffled my way to this point, thank you very much, Graham.
Cheers, Gerard. We'll speak
Yeah.
soon.